Good afternoon. I'm hopeful that you enjoyed your lunch, and I also hope that you've been served or are being served with dessert, and that you will enjoy that while we move forward with our program. So we heard this morning about where government is today, how disruptions across our society will change its context, and how we might think about what task with which we should entrust it. However we choose to answer those questions, the one thing for certain that we do know is that the work of government, at least for the foreseeable future, will be completed by people that serve in it. Chairman Volcker embodies the sort of honorable public servant that we should all hope for, and so does our lunchtime keynote speaker, Senator Bill Bradley. Senator Bradley's career has been as varied as anyone I know, but public engagement runs through it from its beginning until today. He is a Princeton graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, an NCAA Basketball Player of the Year, played in the Final Four, is an Olympic gold medalist, was an NBA star for 10 years with the New York Knicks, where he won 2 world championships with his teammates. And that was before he was elected a United States Senator from New Jersey, where he served 3 terms. He was a candidate for President of the United States in 2000. He has authored 7 books, the most recent of which is entitled, if you take nothing else away from today, remember this title. The book is entitled, We Can All Do Better. He is currently a partner with the investment bank Allen & Company and hosts the Sirius XM radio program, American Voices. Senator Bradley, we welcome you, we thank you, and we look forward to your remarks. Please welcome Senator Bill Bradley.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that introduction. And I just want to say as a board member that I think Tom Ross is doing an incredible job for the Volcker Alliance. Let's give him a round of applause. I've been asked to speak about public service, including my own. But first, I want to talk about an extraordinary public servant, a man I'm proud and fortunate to call a friend, Paul Volcker. Just last night, I was having a conversation with Jim Collins, who was our U.S. ambassador to Russia in the early 90s, when Paul would go and try to talk to the Russians about how to create a private banking system. And Jim said, Paul has a way of getting to the core of a matter. Like the time he told me that, quote, the financial services industry has only one redeeming social virtue. The financial services industry has made only one socially redeeming contribution in the last 25 years, the ATM machine. So, actually, I think no one has made a bigger contribution to America over the last 45 years than Paul Volcker. When the financial system was in crisis, he was always there. At Treasury in the early 70s, when the world financial system almost broke apart, Paul played a significant role in moving exchange rates to the floating system. At the Fed in the 1980s, he slayed the dragon of inflation that threatened the livelihood of every person in America. In 2008, his prestige and record gave a young presidential candidate the credentials he needed to assure the nation that he could handle the economic meltdown. And then as chairman of the Economic Recovery Advisory Board, his advice shaped how the President and the Congress responded to the crisis. The Volcker Rule, gives us comfort today that at least in one respect, things are different now than in 2008. No other American has played such an important role in all three of these large financial crises. Paul is the quintessential public servant, blessed with competence and courage and possessed of unshakable integrity. He knows public service is a calling that can change the world. As he has said, vision without execution is hallucination. That's why his work at the Commission of Public Service and the Volcker Alliance is intended to bring more talent to public service and to deploy it wisely. Whether it was enhancing preparation for public service, integrating risk into the financial system, or bringing clarity to the budget process, Paul, by his life and actions, was stating clearly and emphatically that public service is a noble profession. In my own case, I came to believe that early when I was in high school. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, about 3,492 people in the banks of the Mississippi River. There were 96 in my high school graduating class, and the town had one stoplight. My father was the local banker, and my mother, a former fourth grade teacher, poured all of her energy into her only child, me. And in the basement of our home was a giant stack of Life magazines dating all the way back to the 1930s. And they became my window on the larger world. I would sit down there reading these magazines and dream about faraway places. A few years later, in high school, I decided I wanted to be a diplomat. Then in college, I remember reading a book called To Be a Politician, and I had another possibility that occurred to me. I wrote my senior thesis at Princeton on Harry Truman's re-election to the Senate in 1940, went to Oxford and studied the origins of the Cold War, returned to play 10 years with the New York Knicks. And it was during the Knick years, in the 3-month off seasons, that I tasted a lot of different career futures, including the federal civil service, and ultimately decided to run for political office, the U.S. Senate, right out of the box. And with some luck, in 1978, I won. The feeling that underlay that journey was that public service was important, whether it was being a diplomat or a federal employee in a poverty program or serving as a U.S. Senator. And I guess that you could boil down my motivation to one thing. I wanted to do good. I wanted to leave the world a little better place than I had found it. I remember as a summer intern, Princeton summer intern in Washington, sitting in the Senate chamber the night the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed that desegregated public accommodations, hotels, restaurants. And I watched the roll call, and when the roll call was finished, I thought to myself, something happened here tonight that will make America a better place. And it occurred to me at that moment, maybe someday I can be here in this chamber, making America a better place. The Oxford years, the Knick years intervened, but I never forgot that feeling. Now, some might say the NBA is an unusual training ground for the presidency. But in 2000, when I ran and Paul supported me, I wanted to do an event with NBA players, and I asked the NBA to help, and the commissioner said, David Stern, the league doesn't get involved in these things. And I said, well, you can tell anyone that you have a general policy, and that general policy is the NBA does not get involved in presidential politics unless a former player is running. He agreed. It was a great event, Madison Square Garden, 9,000 people. The NBA affected my Senate career in at least two ways. When I was a rookie, I was seen to be, or thought to be, a transformative player. That plus the fact that I was white and that I'd gotten a big contract brought a ton of publicity. In my first game, 18,000 people cheered every time I touched the ball in warm-ups. But shortly, it was evident that I was way too slow to play guard, and the public turned against me, booing me, spitting on me, throwing coins at me, accosting me in the streets with, "Bradley, you overpaid bum." It hurt, but I kept moving forward. And nothing that ever happened in politics was as visceral or as hostile as that time. So I owe my tough skin to the NBA. Thanks a lot, NBA. Second, as an NBA player, you met the press at least 3 times a week. And it was easy to overemphasize the media, when the real thing was what happened on the court. You either won or lost as a team. Then when I got to the Senate, a veteran senator said, I had a choice. I could either be a show horse or a workhorse. Well, it was an easy decision for me. I decided to become a workhorse, to know what I was talking about on taxes and trade and health care and water policy, and to leave the press attention to the others. The same impulse that told me that on a winning team, one player was just 1 point on a 5-pointed star, told me in the Senate that passing laws was what the job was about. The NBA helped me see what was important was your craft, your ability in the arena, not the publicity. If the result, passing laws, was the most important thing, you needed enough votes to win. And a Republican vote was as good as a Democratic vote. And I realized that, like the dynamics that made a championship team, legislating was fundamentally about people, not party. Republicans weren't villains to be despised. They were colleagues who shared a common commitment to public service. And today, when young Senator-elects ask me what advice I give them, I say, make 5 friends in the opposite party. There'll be a moment, even in times of extreme partisanship, when that friend will help you. In 1986, there were 2 major pieces of legislation, one immigration, one tax reform. The Senate at that time was, of course, Republican. The immigration bill was guided by Al Simpson of Wyoming. And I went to see him one day with a yellow pad, and I had 22 questions about the bill. Just he and I sat in his office, and I asked the questions, and I discovered of the 22 questions, I agreed with him on 16 of those questions, and I disagreed with him on 6 of them. But on balance, I thought that the bill moved the country forward. So when I left, I told him, look, I'll be voting with you. I didn't even know what the Democratic position was. Tax reform was something I cared about. I ran for the Senate in the first place to pursue it. I wrote a book about it in my first 4 years on the Finance Committee. I became a major advocate. When Ronald Reagan and Treasury Secretary Jim Baker endorsed it, I became their partner, even though they were Republicans and I was a Democrat. And ultimately, after 3 detailed proposals, very specific proposals, and over 30 hearings, the bill came down to 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats in a group convened by the Republican chairman of the Finance Committee, Bob Packwood. And we wrote the bill in 2 weeks. As we made our way through the issues, after that vast amount of work that we did prior to getting to that point, we voted up and down on each provision. Sometimes it was 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat. Sometimes it was 3 Democrats, 1 Republican. And whatever that group decided on, we all agreed that was going to be our unanimous position. How could that happen? because we respected and trusted each other as people. We knew where we wanted to go, and together we found a path to get there. And the trust dimension was critical. Paul Volcker also helped me in the 1986 Tax Act, but he probably doesn't remember, do you? In a casual conversation during that period, he told me that he'd raised interest rates, but he still couldn't prevent real estate speculation, given the tax treatment in the industry, which allowed for non-economic real estate development and phony tax shelters. Well, his words gave me great determination and also a big arrow in my quiver to redouble my efforts for tax reform. During those years, Paul, Chairman of the Federal Reserve, lived in New York. I, Senator, lived in New Jersey, and we'd frequently end up on the Friday night shuttle going back to New York. And one night we got to the airport, all seats were taken. So there we were. There were only 2 seats left. They were in row 26, and they were the window seat and the center seat. So there were 2 former Princeton basketball players, one 6'8", the other 6'5", squeezed into the center window and the center seat and the window seat, our knees at our chin. We thought nothing of it. I mean, that's just the luck of the draw that night. Later, I came to see that picture of us sitting folded up in those seats as a reflection of what public service is all about. Public devotion and private sacrifice. In America, the honor is not in the perks. It was the service, the chance to help your neighbor have a little better opportunity to succeed, the chance to give with no expectation of return. Public service at its best requires integrity first, commitment to the law, perseverance in the face of obstacles, and yes, professional courage. That's true not just of U.S. senators or chairmen of the Federal Reserve, but it's also true of judges on the federal bench, or civil servants turning policy into action, or soldiers prepared to die for their country. Public service, I believe, creates the foundation of a more just and prosperous world. In a way, the private sector depends on the public sector. Public resources, higher education, roads, education, all around, healthcare, they make freedom possible. Business depends on decisions by the FAA, the FDA, the FCC, the National Labor Relations Board, and many other government agencies that set the rules for playing the economic game. The work of a competent and respected elected and appointed officials can also send the unambiguous message to the best and most enthusiastic young people that they can make their mark in government. But we should be under no illusion about where we are today in this country. Government is under siege. It began in 1980 when Ronald Reagan said that government was the problem. Reached a turning point in 1994 when Bill Clinton declared the era of big government is over. These were followed by 8 years of George W. Bush and then 8 years of Barack Obama playing a ping pong match of executive orders, unable for whatever reason to get their agendas through the Congress. And today, given that backdrop, and today the whole enterprise of government is endangered by a political movement financed by Charles and David Koch. Over the last 20 years, these Koch brothers have spent billions of dollars promoting their libertarian political views, and in the last decade, they have built a juggernaut. They operate in every state. In 2015, they employed more political workers than all the Republican committees in the country combined. And the core libertarian view, as expressed by Nobel Prize-winning economist James Buchanan, is that the prime purpose of democracy is to protect economic liberty, which, to Koch politicians, means the things that would restrict economic liberty, such as labor unions, efforts to contain global warming, taxing citizens to pay for public education, infrastructure, Medicaid, Medicare, must be ended, along with any government program other than police and the military. Government and public servants, and the public servants it requires, are the enemies of the movement. Their ideological differences take on an even more ominous implication when it promotes voter suppression. The Koch people argue, it's their argument, that broadening participation in our democracy has led to bigger government and higher taxes. Instead of a means to promote social justice, they see government as an impingement on liberty. Therefore, by suppressing the vote, they will reduce pressures on government expenditures with their attendant taxes. And indeed, between 2012 and 2014, Koch state legislators in 41 states introduced 180 bills which curtail who and how people can vote. Such bills obviously shrink participation and harm our democracy. If government survives the Koch libertarian assault, and if the pendulum ever swings back to a more activist government, it is essential that government work better. When modifying a bridge in New Jersey takes 47 permits from 19 different government agencies, it delays what the public desperately needs. When it takes 20 years to tear down a dam in the state of Washington and 15 years to establish a coastal heritage tourist trail along the shore in New Jersey, when nursing homes and schools are hobbled by mind-numbing rules, people wonder what government does other than raise taxes. As a friend of mine says, failures of implementation become failures of policy. Then there's the basic competence of government employees and the work rules that govern them. A report by one of Paul's commissions, Commission of Public Service, said that effective government workers resent, quote, the protection provided to those performers among them who impede their work and drag down the reputation of government workers. Indeed, we need more accountability of government workers. There has to be a process to terminate unproductive dead wood so government employees have more flexibility and are measured by results, not by seniority or endless grievance procedures or how many bureaucratic boxes that they have checked. Given the rulings of the Supreme Court, though, and the laws passed by Congress, civil service, in the words of a friend of mine, quote, has become a property right of the employees themselves. Federal workers answer to no one. Well, if you agree with that, it is particularly dangerous because it plays right into the hands of the growing libertarian movement that wants to eliminate government. If it's not effective, it makes it easier. Eliminate it. After all, government was established to do things, to solve problems, to make life better for people, to provide clear rules of the road. If public employees and their unions don't see the value of making things more accountable, designed by them to achieve results, I fear the whole system itself will be in danger. And given what was said by Frank Fukuyama today about, the Hobson's choice you have, do you actually reform? Or if you do, does that allow people like the governor of Wisconsin to essentially, who is a prime Koch politician, to have an easier chance to dismantle government? Well, it's a Hobson's choice. And I think that we have to be able to have a more effective government, or it's going to be easier to dismantle all of government. When JFK said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," I see a few older heads nodding. He called the best and the brightest of a generation to public service. Today, many of them go into finance or business consulting. But at the end of the day, everyone has to go home at night and tell their kids what they do. What purpose do they serve? What role model do they offer? What moral choices have they made? How do they make the world a better place? It is in those moments that those citizens who've opted for public service can be proud. We've had the privilege of experiencing how meaningful public service can be. The choice of public devotion with private sacrifice, the airplane ride, ignores the personal self-fulfillment of seeing that what you did gave the elderly financial security, taught the young the value of math, rendered the verdict that gave justice, cleaned up the environment, averted the war, led to the medical breakthroughs that saved lives, and invented the processes that reshaped our economy. These are important acts that can't possibly be done by an individual acting alone. They'll take government, and that government requires public servants like Paul Volcker. That's just the way it is. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Senator. That was inspiring. It was amazing. You know, we go to work at the Volcker Alliance every day because we believe making government more effective is critical to democracy. I don't think we could have scripted a better analysis of why effective government is so important. So, Senator, you've always been a hero in my eyes, and I can only say with those remarks, your star shines more brightly. Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause. By my watch, it's 1:11. We're on break until 1:30, at which time we will gather again in the Frank Carlucci Auditorium. We will continue the conversation about how governments respond and should respond to the new governance era and the many challenges we face. So join us at 1:30. Thank you.